Right guys, so we're at the part of the build now where we need to get on with the suspension, so as well as replacing worn out components, we're going to be lowering the car as well. So it's getting all new shock absorbers, as you saw, all round, lowering springs all round, and new lower arms, new drop links, and that should really make this car just handle that little bit better, especially with the new wheels that will be going on it. So with that said, let's get the jack set up, make sure it's safe, and get the wheels off. But I will bring you in so you can see that. Right, so this is a little bit awkward in this light, but we have the top shock bolt there and the lower shock bolt there. To get this shock absorber out, we need to remove the wheel arch liner, which is a nice easy job. It's just a bunch of 10mm bolts, real easy. Well, 10mm nuts really, the plastic nuts, and I've already broke most of them off, so it's only one 10mm nut for me, which makes it easier. So let's pull this off and get access to that shock. Right, so I'll jump in here really quickly. If you are enjoying this content, whether it be the M-oneeleven content, the Smart, the Mini, the other Mercedes content that we have on the channel, please don't forget to subscribe. I really appreciate it. It helps the channel get suggested to more viewers like yourselves. And like, share, and help us grow together. Back to the video. Right. So these bolts will put up a fight. They always do. But it's just how you deal with it. Right, so it's pretty common for this bottom one to be stuck and corroded and just one of the worst bolts on the car. So the best thing to do is use this. Use one of these. They're a great tool, so when you need that extra leverage. Now this will either do one of two things. It will either come off or it will snap in the process and you'll have to find another bolt. But to be fair, I've got a lot of spare bolts like that, so I don't think I'm too worried about that. However, getting it out will be fun if it does happen. Hopefully not though. Hopefully it does just crack off. Just don't want to get that. Don't always do until that brake line. I'd much rather protect the brake line. But you can just keep an eye on the threads and watch what the threads are doing. If the threads start turning at a different rate to the head, then you're likely going to snap it. But if you're careful with it, you shouldn't have too much of a problem. This one is eventually coming out now, so that's not too bad. We're getting there slowly. This is the easy part of the job. Right, so now I've got the shock absorber out. This one is, yeah, very worn out. And the plastic covers all fatigued and that. But it's not the worst one I've seen, but chances are it's probably not working too well anymore. It's doing something, but the bushes are completely shot on this. So what I'm going to do now is go around with the angle grinder, clean up all of this, and a quick lick of paint in there whilst I'm at it, and then hopefully get this spring out, change that whilst I'm there. So fairly easy. Right, so now we've done that. Don't do what I just did and rely on normal specs, especially when using a wire wheel. That was really stupid of me, because if one of those wires breaks free and gets in your eye, you're not in for a good time. So don't do that, and I know I'm going to get ridiculed for it, and I deserve that. Right, now we've got some paint on here. We're going to make it all pretty, or as pretty as it can be, because this subframe is quite corroded. It may well need a new one at some point, but for now we can make do with this one. It's solid enough, so let's get it shined up. I want to make sure that this car, after I put all this into it, is going to stay working for me. So I'm just taking my time. Right, so it's time I've got the spring compressor out now, just to try and compress this compress this spring, and whether it'll work or not, I couldn't say. Right, well, I'll get some punishment for being a bit ridiculous and brutal. Though being careful to try and not knock the brake line, obviously I knocked it. This is brake fluid all over the floor. But, that said, at least that brake line broke here and not whilst I was driving. So, it's really annoying, but I'd rather it happen here rather than driving down the road. So now we need to get some brake lines sorted. So I guess this thing's going to end up with a brake overhaul as well. Well, the list keeps growing, and so does that hole. Despite our little hiccup with the brake situation, it's at least lubricating that nut nicely. That doesn't mean we can't get the rest of this back together. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is get the shock installed. Now, the way I figured out to do this is to put the bottom in first and then put the top in last. Right, so there we go. It's already looking so much better. The only thing letting it down is the lower part. So to be fair, it would be nice to get some new brake drums. The problem is, I think, with doing all this, we're going to wind up needing new rear wheel bearings maybe. We'll see. The backing plate's quite thick, but it depends what we can do with this brake line. I think it's going to need a new brake cylinder at least, but I'll bring you in for a closer look so you can see how much better it looks compared to the beginning. There we go. It looks far cleaner in there now, despite the fact I've painted part of the body as well. But it just really improves that look. Now, I'm not going to put the wheel arch liner back in yet, because I've got the big hole to weld up in the tritium cell. But so far, that's a big improvement. Right, so now we've got the rears done, we're going to move on to the front, and basically it's going new front struts, new lower arms, new bottom ball joint on this side, just for the sake of it, and a new wheel bearing, also for the sake of it. The wheel bearing might put up a little bit of a fight, because the last time we did one we had to cut off the inner race, so we'll see how well that goes. I'm trying to do this without taking the under tray off, but I have a feeling that might backfire. But let's get into it. Most of this will probably be time-lapse because I've really got to get after it. I'm on a limited time crunch, so let's get to it. I've got it jacked up already. Get this wheel off and see how this goes. Right guys, so I'm really glad that I did decide to time-lapse that, because that was over an hour of suffering, which, to be fair, the first part of it went alright. It was a bit awkward getting the caliper bolts out because they had seized, and the wheel bearing started to come off quite easily. Started, and then bound up from some previous indentation. So I think this wheel bearing actually isn't that old, and that's kind of backed up by this, well, fairly recent cap by the looks of it. But for the sake of it, I wanted to replace this anyway, because then I know it's been done. We're replacing the strut, which means this bolt has to come out anyway, because the actual bolt, this long bolt for the wheel bearing, actually goes into the bottom of this strut. So that makes it a little more interesting. These are one-use bolts, apparently. So the stretch bolts, or torque to yield. So basically, every time you take these out, you are supposed to replace them, which is why I may as well do the wheel bearing as well, and then we've got a fresh wheel bearing. And with how much of a challenge that was, I'm glad I'm doing it now. It gets it out of the way. Right guys, so it's been an absolute ordeal to get to this point. If I had left the camera rolling, we'd be 4.5 hours in. This is no surprise for this car really. Everything is just so badly corroded that I need to go around and replace as much of the hardware as I possibly can, so that future jobs on this car aren't this bad. That said, everything's apart now. The struts ready to go back in. Looks a lot nicer than the old one, and I tidied up the spring seat here just to make everything look brand new, or as best I can. We've got the new lower arm in, new anti-roll bar link in. I am going to completely remove the anti-roll bar just to get rid of the old. I literally cut the anti-roll bar link in half, to put it bluntly. Anything that was cuttable that was fighting me did get cut, including myself. I pretty much skinned that knuckle trying to undo one of the top clevis bolts for the clamp at the top of this. So, that said, let's get popping this back together and be done with this part of the job. This has really been a challenge to get this done, but we're about there now. If you are a starter DIY mechanic, I maybe wouldn't recommend doing this job yourself, purely because you sort of have to know what tool to go to at what point before you make your life a whole lot harder by using the wrong tool on the wrong part at the wrong time. That said, let's get this back together and get this job finished. Right guys, there we go. It's finally all bolted up back together. I've just got the brake caliper to hang and the anti-roll bar to reconnect, but I'm going to take that off and clean it up anyway. So as I'm going around this car, you notice that I'm painting things up. Granted, it's covering over rust, but unfortunately I can't find new spindles for this car, which is a shame because if I could, I would have replaced them as well and just get everything refreshed and looking as good as it can. Anyway, that said, we're at a point now where we're pretty much done with this part of it. My God, that was a far bigger challenge than it should have been. Next up is the bodywork side of things. So stay tuned if you're enjoying this content. And don't forget, there will be more M-oneeleven content coming when I eventually get this done.